Hey, welcome back. Today we're continuing our discussion of the Iliad and looking at Book 4, the moment when the war really breaks out. But let's start with key characters in this section. Menelaus is exactly where we left him at the end of Book 3. He's storming around the field looking for Paris, and we see him again as this wronged warrior who is angry and eager for revenge. Agamemnon also comes back in and plays a very similar role, but one new aspect about Agamemnon that we haven't seen before is his deep affection for his brother Menelaus. They have an interesting dynamic in this book. A lot of times Agamemnon seems a character who is primarily focused on himself, a powerful military leader, but one who is very focused on his own glory. But he gets to shine the most, probably, when he has interactions with Menelaus, demonstrating that there is something he does care deeply about, and that's his brother. We also see the gods, who are continuing in the same roles we've seen them. Zeus is attempting to create a kind of balance here, but we also see that he enjoys flicking barbs into some of the other gods and riling them up. You'd think that Zeus would want to keep a kind of peace in Mount Olympus, but he sometimes enjoys taunting some of the other gods, and he does that here in this book. Hera, Athena, and Apollo all get a role in this book as well, but the one who gets the most interesting development is Hera. We get to see a clear picture of her absolute pettiness, that vindictive cattiness where she just wants the Trojans to suffer for not calling her the greatest beauty in heaven. And that comes out very clearly in this book. There's one interesting character who gets a brief moment. His name is Machaon, and he's this great healer for the Greeks. He's going to be important later in the book, so I mention him here. And yet again, we walk down the line of generals and point out the great heroes, get a little conversation back and forth between Agamemnon and each of the big military leaders of the Greeks. This is 3 books in a row that we've sort of had a lineup. And it's pretty good characterization of each of those generals, although I'm primarily going to focus on them when they get their moment of action later in the book. And let's not forget the character Pandarus. He's this excellent archer with this really fantastic bow, and he's seen as a very successful and powerful warrior. But in this moment, he also has vaulting ambition and is swayed to make a major mistake because of his desire for glory. Let's look at what's going on in the story. Book 4 picks up in the moment after Paris has been snatched off the battlefield. Menelaus is still wandering around the battlefield looking for Paris, and we head on up into Mount Olympus where the gods are overlooking all of this. And Zeus begins to taunt Hera and Athena because after all, their hero Menelaus just got embarrassed on the battlefield, and Aphrodite went up to them. But then he comes around to the point, and the point is, clearly Menelaus has won this bout, so that means the war's over, right? We can have peace and everybody can calm down now, right? But Hera and Athena aren't having it. They want this to end with the absolute destruction of the Trojans. They don't want to end peacefully, even if the Greeks are the winners. But Hera could hold the anger in her breast no longer, suddenly bursting out, "Dread majesty, son of Kronos, what are you saying? How can you think of making all my labor worthless? All gone for nothing. Mortal labor, the sweat I poured, my horses panting, spent from launching Achaea's armies, heaping pains on Priam and Priam's sons. Do as you please, but none of the deathless gods will ever praise you." That last line gets repeated a few times in the book whenever Athena and Hera are mad at Zeus. But notice how Hera is complaining about all the effort she put into making this war happen, and Zeus is just going to let it end like this? Of course, we recognize that Hera has no real cost here. It's not her blood, sweat, and tears that are being spent for this war. She acts like she's expended so much effort, but really, what does this cost her? Zeus says, "Do what you please, but next time I want to destroy one of your favorite cities, I don't want you to complain. After all, I honor sacred Ilium most with my immortal heart. Priam and the men of Priam who hurl the strong ash spear. Never once did my altar lack its share of victims, wine cups tipped, and the deep smoky savor. These are the gifts we claim, they are our rights." So Zeus recognizes how faithful the Trojans, the people of Ilium, have been to him, how they've honored him, they've constantly given all these sacrifices to him. And yet, when Hera wants to destroy the city, Zeus is like, okay, fine, as long as I can destroy one of yours. And Hera turns around and says, "Excellent! The three cities that I love best of all are Argos and Sparta, Mycenae, with streets as broad as Troy's. Raise them, whenever they stir hatred in your heart. My cities, I will never rise in their defense, not against you. I'd never grudge your pleasure." There's a horrific pettiness about the gods here, particularly Hera. She's perfectly happy to have her own favorite people destroyed as long as she gets a chance to destroy the people she doesn't like. And Zeus offers no protection for those who have dedicated everything to him. The gods are incredibly fickle. Like fate, there are zero guarantees that they're going to have your back. And in spite of all their best attempts to please the gods, are just going to be destroyed on the whims of the deities. Hera and Athena decide that the best way to end the truce would be for one of the Trojans to break it. That way the Trojans are at fault, because they hate the Trojans. So Athena swoops down to meet up with Pandarus. Pandarus is this fantastic archer, but he's easily swayed by Athena in this opportunity for glory. She stands next to him in disguise, of course, and tells him, "Hey, this is your chance. If you take a cheap shot at Menelaus and take down Menelaus, imagine the glory you'll have, taking down the one man, that leader who is causing all of this conflict. Just take him out, and then you'll win, and you'll get all this glory." And so Pandarus takes the opportunity. He quietly strings and sets his bow while the other Trojans stand in front of him to protect him. And then he takes a shot at Menelaus. Of course, Athena doesn't really want Menelaus to die. She loves Menelaus, and so she's going to protect him. So she vanishes from beside Pandarus, shoots over to the other side, and nudges the arrow away from his vitals. Just enough that it pierces the edge of his armor and draws some blood. Menelaus is struck and falls to the ground, much to the shock and horror of all the Achaeans, especially Agamemnon, his brother. And in this moment, Agamemnon's affection for his brother really shines. The lord of men, Agamemnon, shuddered, frightened to see the dark blood gushing from the wound, and veteran Menelaus cringed himself, but saw the lashing cords and barbs outside the gash, and his courage flooded back inside his chest. Nevertheless, King Agamemnon, groaning heavily, grasped Menelaus' hand and spoke out for the men, as friends around him groaned as well. "Dear brother, that truce I sealed in blood was death for you, setting you out alone, exposed before our lines to fight the Trojans. Look how the men of Troy have laid you low, trampling down our solemn binding truce. But they will never go for nothing, the oaths, the blood of lambs, the unmixed wine we poured, the firm clasp of the right hand we trusted. Never, even if Zeus's wrath does not strike home at once, he'll strike in his own good time with greater fury. Transgressors will pay the price, a tremendous price, with their own heads, their wives, and all their children." And he goes on talking about the destruction on Priam and all of Priam's family because he killed his brother. But at the same time, at the end of the speech, he turns back to Menelaus and says, "And yet, even if we go home victorious, it's not going to be the same if we lose you, brother." But Menelaus is like, "I'm not dead. I'm actually all right." And Agamemnon's like, "Oh, you're not dead, hooray!" And so he calls Machaon, the healer, over to help Menelaus. And when he takes off his armor and checks the wound, it's fairly superficial. He lost some blood, but it's nothing that's going to end his life or anything. And so once Agamemnon is reassured that Menelaus is not mortally wounded, he starts strutting among the heroes, getting them all prepped and ready because the truce is broken. We're going to take out those Trojans now. And so Agamemnon challenges each of the major heroes again, another one of those heroic lineups. Idomeneus, the two Ajaxes, Odysseus, Diomedes, Nestor. Some of them he pats on the back, some of them he kind of ribs a little bit and kind of tries to get them riled up. And so the whole Achaean army begins to march forward in complete silence. Meanwhile, in contrast, the Trojans are all shouting and rallying and rushing towards the Greeks as well. And the two armies clash together, and the first real bloodshed begins. At last, the armies clashed at one strategic point. They slammed their shields together, pike scraped pike. With grappling strength, the fighters armed in bronze, and their round shields pounded, boss on welded boss. And the sound of struggle roared and rocked the earth. Screams of men and cries of triumph, breaking in one breath. Fighters killing, fighters killed, and the ground streamed blood. Wildly as two winter torrents, raging down from the mountains, swirling into a valley, hurl their great waters together, flash floods from the well springs, plunging down in a gorge, and miles away in the hills a shepherd hears the thunder. So from the grinding armies broke the cries and clash of war. It then begins to walk through each little moment in the skirmish, each kill. Antilochus gets a kill, Ajax gets a kill, Antiphus gets a kill. But the thing that is most interesting, that really encapsulates the Iliad, is that as these moments of violence and bloodshed and gore are being described, each time there is a glimpse of something else. There is a glimpse at the value of that person's life outside of battle. Whether it is a glimpse into their home life and their family, the people who love them and are going to miss them terribly now that they're dead, or a glimpse into some of the ways that they benefited the world, their hobbies, their interests, what made them a unique person that has now been snuffed out. And this pattern is going to continue throughout the entire Iliad. Each time someone dies, it's going to recognize the great loss that person has in the universe. And yet the battle rages. Apollo swoops down and joins the Trojans and eggs them on, pointing out that Achilles is sitting out. Now's your chance to really do some damage. Meanwhile, Athena is over there with the Achaeans, driving them forward. And now no man who waded into that work could scorn it any longer. Anyone not speared or stabbed by tearing bronze, who whirled into the heart of all that slaughter, not even a great Athena led him by the hand, flicking away weapons hailing down against him. That day, ranks of Trojans, ranks of Achaean fighters sprawled there side by side, face down in the dust. Death everywhere. Okay, let's look at some of the key features. First of all, there's lots of really excellent personification, especially in the moment that Ares enters the battle. We emphasize terror, rout, and strife as three ideas that are personified here. Ares drove them, fiery-eyed Athena drove the Argives, and terror and rout and relentless strife stormed too. Sister of manslaughtering Ares, Ares' comrade in arms, strife, only a slight thing when she first rears her head, but her head soon hits the sky as she strides across the earth. Now strife hurled down the leveler hate amidst both sides, wading into the onslaught, flooding men with pain. So strife, or conflict, grows and becomes a bigger and bigger figure in this battle. I also mentioned already the way the gods are depicted as the idea of fate. No matter how much you try to appease them, they'll easily destroy all of your plans and ruin your life, as we saw clearly with Hera. There's also the theme of the great cost and ugliness of war that I mentioned as different characters die and it emphasizes their homes and families. For example, when Simoisius dies at Ajax's hands, it says, "And Telamonian Ajax struck Anthemion's son, the hardy stripling Simoisius, still unwed. His mother had borne him along the Simius banks, when she trailed her parents down the slopes of Ida to tend their flocks, and so they called him Simoisius. But never would he repay his loving parents now for the gift of rearing, his life cut short so soon, brought down by the spear of lion-hearted Ajax." And then it describes in detail the gore as he dies. But notice how it focuses on his birth, his family, his parents who care about him. And he never has a chance to repay them. He never has a chance to carry on the family line and name. There's a sense of loss and regret there, even though this is a character who we've probably never heard of and will never hear of again. We still get the sense that his life mattered and it was destroyed in war. There are many excellent epic similes in this section as well. One of my favorites is the description of the blood running down Menelaus' side. Picture a woman dyeing ivory blood red, a Carian or Maeonian staining a horse's cheekpiece, and it's stored away in a vault, and troops of riders long to sport the ornament, true. But there it lies as a king's splendor, kept and prized twice over, his team's adornment, his driver's pride and glory. So now, Menelaus, the fresh blood went staining down your sturdy thighs, your shins and well-turned ankles. So it's this beautifully dyed piece of cloth that's fit for a king's horse, and it's reserved for just the right moment. It's this regal and beautiful. So the blood that's dripping down Menelaus, which is coming from one of the great leaders and one of the great kings, so maybe that's the connection there. But the vividness and the fascinating imagery that comes from these epic similes is so much fun. So we'll see next time what happens as the battle really gets raging. Thanks for watching. You can click to subscribe or watch another video, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.